everyone, and welcome to the Roald Dahl Retrospective, where we take a look at every single adaptation of Roald Dahl's books and shorts. I am Patricia.
My name is Arun.
And today, right before we discuss about our next film based off of Roald Dahl's books, I want to give a quick little update about 36 Hours. So, according to the storyteller, the authorized biography of Roald Dahl, written by Donald Sturrock, Dahl didn't really know too much about 36 Hours until after the movie came out. He had a bit of a disagreement with MGM, who was the one who distributed the film. And so when he found out that they were doing the film, that's when they decided to pay him a $30,000 grant over to him to give credit to where the story was based off of. And that's when he decided to take full force into the next adaptation of his next book, which is the story that we're going to be talking about today.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, are we ready to go to the candy shop?
Yes, let's do so.
Ready to make the lollipop?
All right, here we go. So, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is based off of the book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The movie came out in 1971. It stars Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka and Peter Ostrum as Charlie Bucket. Now, the book is a very well-known classic by a lot of people. It came out around 1964, and for a lot of people, they already know about it because it has become a staple in children's books. But for those who don't, it's the story about a young boy named Charlie Bucket, and one day he hears the news that the greatest candy maker in the world, Willy Wonka, is going to be distributing 5 golden tickets into his chocolate, and whoever finds it can be able to gain access to his candy shop, that they can be able to get a lifetime supply of chocolate. Throughout the journey of the chocolate factory, that's when a whole bunch of wackiness and mayhem ensue. So a lot of people consider this to be one of the best, if not the best, Roald Dahl movie adaptation. And I have to say that when going in from 36 Hours to this, it's definitely a much more familiar ground that we're covering.
Yeah, but shall we talk about the elephants in the room before we obviously delve into it? And that is, while many people will say it is a faithful adaptation of Roald Dahl, I mean, Roald Dahl himself hated this movie.
Yes, he did. And Aaron and I, we recently read through the book. I rented my book from the library. There are a lot of things that are very similar to the book, but then there are a lot of changes to it. And we'll discuss about that along the way. But yes, you're absolutely right. He absolutely hated Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. He didn't like the fact that a bunch of people had changed a lot of things from the original script. There was a lot of music inclusions from the Oompa Loompas that he absolutely despised. And he out of all of the things that he hated about this movie, Gene Wilder, he despised Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka. He thought of him as incredibly presumptuous, and he wanted Spike Mulligan to be Willy Wonka. And not only that, but pretty much every single person from Monty Python's Flying Circus, such as John Cleese, Eric Idle, all those people, he wanted to have either one of them be Willy Wonka, but no, we instead got Gene Wilder, and he wasn't really happy about that.
No, and which I think was a bit of a shame, really, because you can tell that Gene Wilder was he really was going through the motions with this movie, like when he wanted to portray Willy Wonka in a particular way, and I mean, obviously we'll get to the point when we first get him introduced into the story, but I mean, you could tell from the way that he went about interacting with the characters, to the way that he wanted to be portrayed on screen, the way he wanted to kind of surprise people with some of the performances that he did as well. And, throughout the movie, I think that's going to be one of the talking points. We're going to see that, he was really pouring out into this. And dare I say, I think probably, an appearance that's supposed to have warranted an award if he ever got one. No.
Yeah, for sure. So the inspiration for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory came from an experience from Roald Dahl's childhood. When he was in school, Cadbury would go over to their academy and they would be distributing, chocolate samples so that they can be able to see how it would react to the public. And he loved it so much that it basically became like a major inspiration for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where Cadbury was essentially, Wonka, and Rowntree was essentially the other competitors like Slugworth and all the others. So then we have the book, and it's interesting of how the movie came to be. So it all started with the Quaker Oats Company. Yes, the Quaker Oats Company, the ones behind the oatmeal and the granola bars and all that stuff. So they wanted to create.
Like that Chucky Finster from the Rugrats is afraid of.
Yes, that's the one. That's the same. Yeah, the mascot that Chucky Finster is afraid of. Yes, the guy in the oatmeal box. So,
anyone who says can't say they haven't got a Nickelodeon thing to talk about here. So there's your fish, everybody.
Yeah, there you go. So they wanted to find a hook so they can be able to create their new candy. And so they read through Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and they were like, yeah, let's create candy inspired by Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And so afterwards they began to produce the film so it can promote their candy. And, then we have David Wolper, who was the producer, Mel Stewart, who was the director. And we have Leslie. I always have difficulties pronouncing the name. I think it's Bricusi, who did the music. And
I'm not too sure.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say his name. I also know him as the guy who also did the music for Scrooge, which was a Christmas Carol musical, and that had Albert Finney as Scrooge. So I knew about that. But anyway,
the music is one of the better adaptations of A Christmas Carol.
Yes, it is, for sure. So there's a reason why that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was changed into Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You see, this was done because the movie was done in 1971, and we were just, towards the end of the civil rights movement. Charlie was kind of like a derogative term for African Americans. So they decided to change the name to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And this isn't like the only African American thing that was removed. For example, in the original book, Charlie was supposed to be an African kid, and the Oompa Loompas were African pygmies, but in revised versions of the book, they have been changed to little people. So yeah, there's a bit of controversy when it comes to that topic, and there's a lot of interesting behind the scenes stories about the movie. I would highly recommend that you read the book Pure Imagination: The Behind the Scenes of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it has a whole bunch of excerpts from the cast and the crew and the director. So I highly recommend that you read that. And there's been a ton of interviews from the cast of their experiences working on the movie. So there's nothing that you couldn't find online. So I guess
it's kind of like looking at the the movie as a whole in regards to how it was made. Like, you can definitely tell that there was inspirations everywhere. Like, the minute we were actually introduced into like the main part of the Chocolate Factory, we were immediately making comparisons to the Wizard of Oz.
Speaking of the Wizard of Oz, that's what Roger Ebert said on his review of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. He said, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is probably the best film of its sort since The Wizard of Oz. It is everything that family movies usually claim to be but aren't. Delightful, funny, scary, and exciting, and most of all, a genuine work of imagination. Willy Wonka is such a surely and wonderful spun fantasy that it works on all kinds of minds, and it is fascinating because, like all classic fantasy, it is fascinated with itself.
Wouldn't you love to be in the room with Roald Dahl and Roger Ebert having a discussion about this movie?
Oh my God, it would have been like a massive fight.
Good grief! It's like I wouldn't even want to be in between them probably, because you'd have Roger Ebert arguing about all sorts of things, and Roald Dahl kind of just shooting down everything that he puts in front of him. I could probably just imagine that just taking place.
He definitely would have agreed with Gene Siskel though, because Siskel didn't like the movie. He said, and I quote, Anticipation of what Wonka's factory is like is so well developed that eventual appearance is a terrible letdown. Sure enough, there is a chocolate river, but it looks too much like the Chicago River to be appealing. The quality of the color photography is flat. The other items in Wonka's factory, the bubblegum trees and the lollipop flowers, look very cheap. Nothing in the factory is appealing.
Yeah, well, like it's like well, most movies in 1971. I mean, you could definitely tell that. I mean, what else came in around? It came out around about that time.
I mean, let's see. There was a let me see if I can pull up a list really quick. But
Yeah,
while I do
what are you doing
that,
that? Like, in regards to, you were talking earlier about the whole, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was changed to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and they also changed done to also the Oompa Loompas as well, which, obviously I think I think blessings in disguise, I guess you could say, because now the Oompa Loompa is now kind of like part of cinematic history, pretty much, so like, there's people still you still go to Comic Cons dressed as Oompa Loompas, and you still get. It's still like one of those when you immediately see it, like you think Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, you think the Gene Wilder film, and like so there was that, and like it's here's the thing about this, which is kind of sad really when you think about Roald Dahl, and this is another elephant I don't think we've kind of talked about is that given that they came off of that. And about 10 years later, we'd be talking about Roald Dahl, unfortunately having that very unfortunate comment about Jews on the backdrop of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon a couple of years later, and he made that very very stupid comment. I think about the Jewish people. I think obviously you can kind of look at that and think, hey, you got this, that, all these changes that were made in the 1971 film, and then all of a sudden you had this about in 1983. Like it's like Roald Dahl had a pretty rocky time, I think, in the latter stages of his rising career. I think you could say.
And I guess it's not too much of a surprise that Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory will be the only film adaptation based off of his books for at least another 18 years.
Mm-hmm. And so, well, it was, I think maybe that would played into it a little bit, but I think the fact that they knew that people were very hard to please. I think movie companies knew that Roald Dahl was going to be very hard to please. I think after
For sure.
reception of Wonka. I think I think that also added a lot more pressure on Cosgrove Hall, the BFG we talked about before, and the fact that they had all this kind of weight kind of like amassed upon them. Also, they were trying to get back, they're trying to steal some of the audience away from Disney. So like that also kind of played into it as well. The reception that this film had, and its reaction to it from the original creator to the stars of the film and the reception it got, but publicly, it's basically rippled across the lake, and all sorts of reactions came of that. That's how I mean, like it was, that generation's, Wizard of Oz. Like it changed a lot of things for a lot of people.
Yeah, and not only that, but I think that the movie didn't really gain its popularity until about maybe a few years later, like almost a decade later, because that was when Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was released on VHS. That was when it was released all the time, and more people knew about it, and more people had, given more praises and attention to it than it ever did when it was first released.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like when it first got released to theaters, it bombed massively at the box office. Like it was. I mean, how much are we looking at? Like 4.5 million, I think it made.
The budget was 3 million. It only made 4.5 million back.
Yeah, and there was plans for a sequel. Like,
they were going to adapt Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, but they never did.
Exactly, and like it's so sad because and we'll probably talk about this later a bit. Like the fact that they had this, oh yeah, we're gonna have this whole Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory kind of like maybe universe. I think oh hey, there's gonna be maybe we might even get a TV series because Scooby Doo was obviously doing the whole every there's also like loads of adaptations of loads of famous things, and at that time they thought maybe hey maybe we can get Hanna-Barbera to maybe do a Willy Wonka cartoon, maybe something like that. There was this whole it looked like there was this whole plan to like make this a huge thing, and but the minute they heard the box office come in, it's like they dropped it until obviously later until VHS, and then all of a sudden it was in every single home once again. And
yeah, for sure.
I think the interest then it just evaporated. I think after that, and so it basically just kind of became a childhood classic, if anything, and it didn't really go any further until obviously Johnny Depp kind of like did the 2005 version. So.
Yeah, we'll talk about that much later on. So I have the list right here of the movies that came out in 1971. So we have A Clockwork Orange, Fiddler on the Roof, The French Connection, Dirty Harry, The Beguiled,
Yeah, you
Duel.
can't you can't really compare them to like Willy Wonka. Really, I think that's a bit unfair. Clockwork Orange was I think it was not the same demographic. I think you say it was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
yeah, I mean so what other kids films came out at that time?
Oh,
Like
kids films. Okay, well, let's see if I.
obviously it was in the doldrum days of Disney. I think we can definitely say because I think Walt Disney at that time had obviously passed away. Quite a few years after the fact, did he?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, for sure. So let's see. Let's see. We had Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, but it's half action, half animated. So there's that. And let's see. The Point, which I am well aware of. The Point is a movie that is based off of the music by Harry Nilsson. And then there is The Cat in the Hat, that little animated special for CBS. And that's pretty much it for animated movies.
yeah, when you really think about it, well, yeah, you could say that that kind of compounds, the failure of of Willy Wonka in a way. The fact that it only earned so much, in the middle of June as well. Everyone was this was like in the middle of summer, pretty much, and
Yeah.
with what happened, guys? As far as I'm aware, there wasn't that much competition out
Yeah, for
there.
sure. And to be fair, this would be like about 4 years until Jaws would come out, and then it invented the summer blockbuster.
Hmm.
So yeah, I guess we're about 17 minutes in. I think we should actually just talk about the movie.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, should we talk about the pros and talk about what we really, really love about this movie? And I think, while other people might be, I mean, obviously, Will Dahl himself would not be too happy with Gene Wilder. I think his performance, I think, in this is phenomenal.
Oh, I,
I
I
think.
absolutely think so too. I think that he's one of the best things about this movie, especially when you go over to the second half of the film and you see Gene Wilder's performance as Willy Wonka is so crazy, bizarre, weird, but at the same time he's so lovable and he's so inviting and he kind of has like a really good edge to him when he has that very famous scene where he yells out to Charlie that he broke the rules of drinking the fizzy lifting drinks, and that scene was amazing, and it just shows you the great range of his performance. Now this was when Gene Wilder was he was a bit of a household name because he was doing like various films, but I think that he would get a lot more famous a few years later when he would do Young Frankenstein.
Exactly. And I think also one thing I should have pointed out actually before, when I said that, Wilder was, in this film was his acting ability in this, I think, was worthy of an award. He was actually nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actor in any musical or comedy.
Right.
So he did get to that. He did get to that point. But I mean, and also in 1972, the film did receive an Academy Award nomination for original best score. So
Which is kind of ironic because before we recorded, Aaron, we actually looked back on the reviews of this movie, and pretty much the critics who didn't like this movie had pointed out that the music was forgettable.
well, which is really strange because everyone remembers the Candyman song, and people do remember "Come with Me" to a world of a beautiful imagination, and there are some wonderful scores in this,
Yeah,
in
absolutely. There's
that.
amazing scores. Candyman, I Got a Golden Ticket, the Oompa Loompa song, Pure Imagination, I Want It Now. There a lot of the songs a lot of people do remember, except for one, but we'll get to that later.
I think the one thing that restricts it, I think these musical numbers, I think, is the world that it takes place in. Because obviously when Grandpa gets out of bed and starts dancing around, you can definitely tell that they were working within a very restricted studio, from what I can gather. And I think maybe if this was done, maybe if they had an opportunity to take him outside and obviously go out into the world and have him kind of experience going outside for the first time in 20 years. Obviously this is where he's been. Maybe he probably would have given a bit more, gravitas to basically his restrictions that he had. But in this, it was you could definitely tell the way that I think that they went around, with some musical numbers where they needed to be kind of dancing around and things like that. I think that you could definitely tell that was slightly restricted
Yeah,
that.
and
I
that's
can
the
kind of
one
see
thing.
from a visual point of view why people would come across as saying that the musical numbers weren't all that inspiring.
Yeah, and that, I think that's the one thing that Hairspray took advantage of. There's this one scene in which you have Tracy's mother, who's been inside the house for about 10 years, and she's, been working as a laundress, and she gained so much weight that she didn't want to appear in public because of that. And so there's this nice song called "Welcome to the '60s," where, she encourages her mom to go outside and embrace being different and all that stuff. And it stays in the house at first because she's afraid to go outside, but then she steps out and everything is so magical with with all the city life. And then she gets the makeover, and then and then we have this big dance number where she's happy and all that stuff. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see Grandpa Joe, maybe like he stays in the house at first, and then finally he dances around and he talks about, like, I never thought that I would see, happiness around. I thought that my life would be incredibly depressing and stuck in this bed. But yeah, I think that you do bring up an interesting point, that it does kind of feel a little bit constricted.
Yeah. This might sound really unfair, but there's one movie that sticks everyone in mind, and everybody was talking about it, and everyone was singing the song. And you know what that was a couple of years ago?
What?
Everything is Awesome from the Lego Movie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like it's like there's a huge dance number, and like everybody's like, it's like it's going all out for it. And I think that's what this song, I think I've Got a Golden Ticket should have done. I think, and like, not to that degree, obviously. I mean, like, that would probably cost them millions to do, which they probably would have lost, in the box office. But I mean, like, yeah, they should have just done something where, there were scenes where they could film on the street, of like him going, they could have had him going, like, running down, saying hello to everybody, like, obviously continuing on the song with Charlie be, in tow. Like, again, like, it goes back to my original, what I was saying, the restrictions within the studio, I think, just didn't translate well, I think.
Yeah. And the fact that Roald Dahl was very content with having everything by the book. It says it in the original book that when Grandpa Cho was getting up from the bed for the first time, he just, boop, he got out of the bed. That's pretty much it. There's no struggling to, like, get his legs together. There's no times in which he was, like, falling down. No, he just, like, got out of the bed and he just started, like, prancing around, and that's pretty much it.
Well, in the audiobook I used to listen to as a child, I think we didn't even get that far. He just said, "Oh, I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to walk with you." He didn't really that wasn't actually kind of like a main part of the story.
Not even
like,
close.
Okay, I'll do it. And then next thing you know, he's like, he's out of bed. No fanfare to it or anything.
Yeah, and he's the oldest out of the grandparents. He's 96 and a half. So it's like, wow, he just boop, got out of the bed. I'm good to go. Let's go to this chocolate factory, Charlie.
Yeah, whatever he's eating, I want some.
What, cabbage water?
Well, I'm sure he's getting more than that. Oh, mind you, we never actually got to that part of it. Like, this movie is so old school at the same time. We can all agree that, like, it comes from a different era, but the fact that Charlie's giving Grandpa Joe money to, like, buy tobacco and stuff like that, which, by the way, how on earth would he do that if he can't get out of bed? Well, that's another thing. But the fact that there's references to tobacco, there's references to other things as well. One thing actually that kind of took us by surprise, which is that some people might be surprised by this for a 1971 film, but this film has product placements.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, there's a product placement for Siemens for obviously the supercomputer trying to find all the golden tickets, and then there's one for Philips as well for I think a record player or something like that. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, so like there's product placements in these movies, which really surprised because wouldn't you think some of the product placements you thought would have been in here would be like things like Cadbury's and like Hershey's and things like that, and like as far as I'm aware, they're not name drops in the film whatsoever.
No, I guess maybe because they couldn't afford it. Because something like Cadbury or Hershey's, I'm sure that the amount of money to pay for, hey, let's put that product placement on our movie would have been a lot more expensive.
Yeah, it's like you would think that the companies themselves would have said, "Oh wait, you're doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, we gotta be in this movie,"
Yeah, but let's be honest. I mean, we already know about the story behind one of the candy companies, I forget which one it was. I think it was, but they were saying about like, oh, this movie from Steven Spielberg called E.T., and they want to feature this particular candy, M&Ms. Yeah, there was a Mars company. So the Mars company was told that, hey, they want to show the M&Ms when E.T. does his little showcasing about like he wants to go home, and they were like, no, let's not do it. And so they decided, hey, let's talk to the Hershey company with the Reese's Pieces, and they were like, yeah, sure, let's do it. We don't have that much to lose, and their stocks just like quadrupled. So they thought that maybe, oh, this movie about some book, it's like, I don't think it'll be like worth anything.
Yeah, but M&Ms are everywhere pretty much. I don't think I don't think they could have gained anything out of like doing ET, but that's just me.
Yeah, but I mean, it definitely did a lot for the Hershey's company, because I recently read an article about like what is the most popular candy that kids want on Halloween, and Reese's Peanut Butter Cups is number one.
Mm-hmm. Mind you, I think we could all have a debate whether like Hershey's chocolate is actually chocolate or anything, but I think that's another podcast in itself.
Okay, fair enough. An interesting fact about Charlie's actor Peter Ostrum: this is the only movie he's ever been in. This was his first debut role, and he didn't do any other films after that, even though that he actually had a 3-film contract. And Peter just basically said no, he wants to focus on going to school and all that stuff. And now he's a veterinarian, but every once in a while he does go to conventions and he does get interviews, and he goes to lectures and all that stuff discussing about his experience working on the film. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this will be his only film, even though he did a pretty good job at it.
Yeah, and funny enough though, like he still does conventions from what I understand.
He does, yeah.
Yeah. So like he's going there, and people want to put autographs in front of him for and like it's nice as well, because like after you've been told like oh your movie only did like a couple of million at the box office, and like you thought that it's going to be a little thing that no one's really gonna really know about, unless except for those hardcore people who actually watched it, and then all of a sudden it goes on to home video, and then all of a sudden it just becomes this phenomenon. And then it gets to the point where it's like, guys, coming up in the, conventions, dressed up as Oompa Loompas, and, even the characters themselves, saying, oh, hey, I want your autograph. Hey, you're the original Charlie. Like, there's no Charlie like you. Like, that's got to be amazing. And, according to Peter Ostrum as well back in the day, and, someone told me and said, oh, hey, we're thinking of making Peter Ostrum at the time, like one of the Arnolds in Hey Arnold. I'd be like, yeah, I'd be up for that. He's a shame that he didn't take his childhood career, a bit further, because goodness knows what he would have done end up doing. I think he probably would even more successful than Macaulay Culkin. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, but depending on what films he would have been in. If the movie would have been a bigger success, I'm sure that he would have been in Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what other films he would have been in.
Well, it doesn't really there's been children who've appeared in movies that haven't made all that much money, but then went on to do obviously other better things. So it's like it's not necessarily I don't think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory would have been necessarily the end of his career. I think obviously he just chose to just go out of the industry, and obviously do something else. Obviously become veterinarian in Cornell University. But it's as far as I'm aware, in regards to his acting ability and the way that he carried himself as Charlie in that film, I think he did a phenomenal job. I think in that, I think obviously we make comparisons to the Wizard of Oz. I think in regards to if I asked who was who I'd prefer to watch, the Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, or Charlie and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I probably would choose Charlie. I think in this, even though both actors and actresses did pretty phenomenal jobs in their roles.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the kids. So each of the 5 kids, they do a pretty good job of portraying as these ungrateful, spoiled little brats. You have Augustus Gloop, who's like this German fat kid. Oh, by the way, just want to let everybody know, this is definitely the first of the adaptations where you notice the Roald Dahl tropes and cliches that he would use in pretty much every single one of his books, and then later on his movie adaptations. You might as well make a checklist, like weird terms and phrases, check. The fat kid, check. The spoiled brat, check. The mean, greedy adults, check. The wacky shenanigans, double check. So it does fit a lot into, the style that Roald Dahl would be known for.
And to be fair, though, Roald Dahl isn't the one who also fit into this kind of thing. Like, you watch, most of the anime that you see on Crunchyroll, they have these types of characters in them.
They
So,
do have a lot of tropes, yeah. You have to have the tsundere, you have to have the girl with the gigantic boobs, you have to have the pervert, you have to have the neurotic kid, you have to have the shonen character who is like this weakling, but he becomes strong in the end. So yeah, you do
so
have
yeah,
those kind
let's
of
give some
tropes.
credit to Roald Dahl. At least we didn't have the other character with the large boobs in it. Okay. Let's all give Roald Dahl some credit for not including that character, though, like in some places where you find media.
Oh my
So.
god. But yeah, going back into the kids, all of them do a phenomenal job. There's Augustus Gloop, Veruca Salt, Violet Beaureguarde, Mike Teevee. Um, I think that for kid actors they do a great job. With Augustus Gloop being like this glutton, even though in the book is depicted as like somebody who's a lot larger, and you have Veruca Salt, who's this spoiled brat whose father comes from a peanut factory, and she demands for everything. Violet Beauregard, who's this gum enthusiast who wants to break the record for chewing the most gum. And then we have Mike Teevee, who's obsessed with television, and he dresses up as a cowboy, and he has a whole bunch of toy guns. And
Yeah.
so,
By the
yeah,
way, I think we should talk about, obviously, I want to give a shout out to actually all these actors because, they all do a great job. And by the way, some of them are still active today. So, the guy who played Mike TV, Paris Themmen, he's still, he went on to go on to play the Fawning Fan in Star Trek Voyager. And then he went on to also appear in things like Jeopardy, and also like he also did some appearances on the Today Show and things like that. So like he went on to do various other things as well, and and also there was the person who played Veruca Salt. She's Julie Dawn Cole. She's still active as far as I'm aware, and she's. Now been a she transferred actually from being an actress. She went on to be a psychotherapist, and so
hmm
she's currently doing that at the moment. And so,
yeah,
you know,
and Denise Nickerson continued her acting career until she passed away last year.
and it was which is a shame really because Denise Nickerson is probably out of everyone, out of all the other kids except for Charlie, obviously. I think it was probably the one we enjoyed the most. I think in the performances, and she even got her own singing number in this.
No, that's Veruca.
Oh,
You're talking about Violet. Yeah, I mean,
oh,
yeah, it's Veruca who does the singing performance. Violet, she does do a good job, especially when she's talking about like, oh, I have the world record for chewing this gum for 3 months, and I beat my best friend. Hi there, look what I did.
oh my
But yeah,
God.
but we definitely did say when we were watching the movie that if it's not Charlie, then Veruca was definitely the best performance because her spoiled brat persona was so convincing, and her singing was actually really really good. So yeah, we had a lot of fun watching her.
Yeah. Tell you what, out of all the kids, if you had to give them their own spin-off, which one would you rather see?
Jeez. Uh, you know what? I mean, I would probably, to see, I would think that like Mike TV, the fact that he watches too much television, he would definitely be like one of those TV reviewers online talking about like television, or maybe for Veruca Salt, if she's going to be like this overreacting and all these kind of things, she definitely reminds me of Angelica for some reason.
It kind of reminds me of Montana Max from Tiny Toon Adventures.
Yeah, that as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
she definitely is like she's definitely the prototype of like these spoiled mean characters that for some reason or another you just hang out with them.
yeah, maybe my TV, maybe it could be kind of like like he watches TV and like it's an idea for like from a TV show and he kind of like just parodies that and like
hmm
so I'm trying to mind you, it kind of reminds me of like what was that other show where where there was wasn't there another show where the character was obsessed with television, wanted to kind of like be like the characters in that show. Like it's not OKKO. I know it's probably not that, but
Mm.
I'm thinking of something else. I can't remember. If I do remember it, I'll leave it in the comment sections below. But I'm a blank at the minute. So
Yeah, sure. Can you hold on for just 1 minute? I have a phone call.
yeah, go on.
Okay, so yeah, let's go over to the adults, besides Willy Wonka, of course. So I think that Grandpa Joe is definitely a very, interactive character. He's very optimistic, telling Charlie that, you're going to get the golden ticket eventually. And then you have Slugworth. So Slugworth is like our quote
Well, before
unquote
we move on to Slugworth, I
antagonist.
mean, there's obviously there's something to note here, and that is that in this version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the father's actually dead, or the father's not around.
That's right. Yeah. In the book, Charlie's father works at a toothpaste factory where his job is to twist the cap on the toothpaste. And so, yeah, in the movie, they killed him off, and it's just the mother who's working at this at this laundromat where she's like washing clothes for people. And I think from what I understand, listening into the movie, that she called Grandpa Joe Dad, in the book, that Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine, that's Charlie's father's parents, and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina, they are her parents. So they kind of swapped it around. And in the book, Charlie doesn't have a newspaper job so that he can be able to make extra money for the family. He's just a kid who just goes through school.
Mm-hmm. And like, it would be interesting to see, like, he would also go to school, but then also on the side he would actually have to do like odd jobs and things like that. Kind of like, recently we saw Abominable, and for the DreamWorks film, and so you could see that she was kind of like working. And it's nice if it was kind of like, oh well, she's having to work because obviously the father's not around anymore, so she has to pick up the slack. It would have been nice to see if that would have been Charlie, and give us a bit more sympathy for him. Not to say he didn't need any sympathy already.
Yeah, that's yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think that things play out just like they do in the book. So the kids start finding the golden tickets in their chocolate, and in the book it said that there's a Russian woman by the name of Charlotte who forges the golden ticket, but she's the second person as opposed to the last person. But then they were able to find her pretty quickly, and it's kind of like a one-off thing. It's like a footnote in the book when compared to in the movie. It's kind of like this little obstacle about this adult who from Paraguay, who found the golden ticket, and then it's found out a few minutes later that it was a forgery.
So yeah, the thing about this though is that I think this is what we might like my least favorite part of the movie, where obviously there's the massive hunt for the ticket, and anyone who's read the books and anybody who's kind of like understands what Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is all about, we know eventually that Charlie's going to eventually get the ticket, and I think whether you can say. It was, obviously for people who'd never seen or heard of the story, I guess maybe it was probably something exciting for them. But I don't know, they saw all these skits that were kind of like, there's one woman who was like, who'd husband been taken hostage, and the reason they took him hostage because they want the Wonka bars that she had. To see if they had the golden tickets inside, and it just became the kind of this absurdity. Like the president was ordering these these Wonka bars to see if there was a golden ticket inside. There's other people who were doing it as well, and people forging the tickets and things like that. I think some of the segments that were going around got a little bit out of control. I think.
I think the one that got out of control the most was not only the woman whose husband was kidnapped and taken hostage until she gave away the Wonka bars, but also the scene in the psychiatry room where a therapist was talking about like how he had a dream, and the psychologist was given like some sort of Freudian discussion about like dreams are nothing to interpret. But then when he said like, oh, but an angel told me that there's this, I was going to get the Wonka bar and I was going to get the golden ticket. And he's like, oh, what, where? So yeah, everybody was like going overboard with this. And we definitely do have a few minutes going over to the news and discussing in detail about how, people from around the world were going absolutely crazy for looking for, the golden tickets. And
there's a lot of moral arguments about whether what Willy Wonka did was actually for the good of mankind or not. Like, he wanted to find an heir to like carry on the Wonka legacy, but at the same time he was probably like, destroying most of humanity whilst he was doing it,
Yeah. I mean, to be quite honest, I don't think he would have cared.
Yeah, it's like, imagine like there'd be like sequels of like, say like, Charlie's now the the owner of the factory, but he's still being threatened by people who have like, been promised, they get golden tickets and like, now they're after his fortune and stuff like that, So it's like, there would have been unforeseen consequences, I think, from the whole, ticket search, I probably imagine. But that's just
sure.
Yeah.
And now let's go over to the discussion of, where Charlie is feeling defeated that he'll never get the golden ticket. So it does play out just like it does in the book, where Charlie receives a birthday present from his family on the marshmallow cake, which actually is in the book. And then there's, where Grandpa Joe spends some of his money from the tobacco, and they decide to look for the golden ticket, but that's not there either.
Well,
And then
how dated is this movie that, back in the day, tobacco was about as much as a chocolate bar.
yeah,
Like
yeah, for sure.
now,
That's
now with all the taxes and everything, because everyone realized, oh, hey, smoking, putting tar in your lungs is bad for you. Apparently, now that penny is now dropped, tobacco is nowhere near the price of a candy bar today.
oh
But
yeah, for sure. It's way more expensive.
exactly, but I think in regards to that whole thing, I mean, I would have done it kind of differently. I mean, I wouldn't have had it where you would have played out like, oh hey, the fifth ticket's been found, and oh hey, it was a fraud. I would have been like oh well, the likelihood is that it's going to be still slim, and but there's no more money left for them to spend money on chocolate bars for, and then all of a sudden he which is actually kind of true to the book, he does find some money on the street, and he goes off and buys this chocolate bar and ends up getting the golden ticket because of it, and everyone goes into hoo-hurrah for it. But I think I would have just kind of played it as that, rather than like saying, oh hey, the fifth ticket's been found, and oh hey, it's a fraud.
Yeah.
The game is still going. Have the game still be going, except just have the fact that the character is obviously defeated at this point, and there's nothing that he can do about it until that magic silver dollar comes, right in front of his feet.
Going into Charlie feeling defeated, let's talk about the song "Cheer Up, Charlie."
The most useless part of the movie, pretty much, like that whole thing.
Yeah, I even read an excerpt from Pure Imagination, the behind the scenes of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Mel Stewart basically said that exact notion, Aaron. I'm going to read it off really quick. He, let me see if I can find it. The only song I had doubts about was Cheer Up Charlie. In terms of storytelling, it was a nice contrast to Veruca's I Want It Now, but I felt it slowed down the film. The music and lyrics were excellent, but the song didn't add anything to the scene. The number occurs after a dejected Charlie talks to his mother about his dimming prospects for finding a golden ticket. At the point in the story, I feel the audience needs to meet Willy Wonka as soon as possible. Even though I use the song in the theatrical version, I often remove it when the film plays on TV in order to meet scheduling requirements.
Why not just remove it from the whole thing? In regards to and if you were gonna have that, you have Cheer Up Charlie, I would have had his mother actually sing it to him rather than singing it to the back of his neck. To me, it just didn't feel like, it would be something that I would have, just kind of like her just randomly singing while she's working, or when she's taking a break or whatever. It's for me, it would have just been either have this interaction with the characters, or with a musical number in it, and have it actually kind of mean something, and maybe bring Charlie back up to his obviously to back to from his his sad place, and bring him back up to where he can somewhat face life again. Even though he's not got that golden ticket, and have kind of that kind of moment. But the fact that he just kind of randomly sings it while he's walking away, and not have any kind of meaningful purpose to it, it just kind of feels like filler. It's just it. So why are we here? Why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm. So going into when Charlie found the silver dollar in the sewer, in the book, he did find money in the streets that was buried in snow. This was around during winter time. It was in January. That's when it takes place. While in the movie, it takes place around September. So this is the scene in which when Charlie's father gets fired from his job, and he only makes pennies a day by shoveling snow in the streets, and everybody is starving. They basically cut off half of their meal portions, and that's when he finds the silver dollar in the streets, and he decides to go over to the candy shop to buy some candy. And he starts in the movie, we see that what happens where he just is scarfing off the scrumdiddlyumptious bar, and we're asking about why is he doing that? He must be really hungry. But in the book, it makes a lot of sense because he's starving. In fact, he got so skinny that he looks like a skeleton. So after he ate that candy bar, then he asks for another one because he's still hungry. In the movie, he wants to give it to his Grandpa Joe, and so he gets a regular bar, and when he opens it, that's when he finds the golden ticket. And in the movie, he rushes home right away to talk about, that he found the golden ticket. But in the movie, he's approached by Slugworth, who is Wonka's competitor in the candy business.
By the
And
way, I mean, obviously he's been approaching all the kids too. Obviously, so you knew from the get-go that this guy was some kind of bad entity in all of this. And then when you were kind of like building up to the fact that, oh, he's going to get, Charlie's going to get confronted by this guy, and you're wondering what on earth he's been whispering this entire time. And so it's been good build up until that time. And then when we hit it, like, you can definitely tell that this guy is obviously some creep who wants to harm Willy Wonka in some way. And so he's going to obviously be kind of like our villain for the piece. And so he asks for the everlasting gobstopper, which is the one thing he's been asking everybody else to get. And so, but mind you, the way that they kind of like break off from that, the fact that they kind of left it on a silent note, I would have accepted, like, he would have just walked away. And but the cut from that is so quick, it kind of makes you feel like, oh, hey, that just that happened really quickly. I think they should have been kind of like, when you're the villain of a movie, I mean, you obviously want to have some kind of presence. Obviously, so like say for example, like Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, like she it's not kind of the same. I do admit that, but when she makes a presence, you can see that presence is felt. I felt like that he kind of like came in very quickly, kind of like just said his piece, and then after that he just kind of like walked off in like and his walk away, his exit was basically just kind of like half of it was kind of cut for that, barely in favor of cheer up Charlie, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I just felt like he should have had more presence, I think, and then that threat was still kind of lingering. But they kind of walked him in and walked in. And don't get me wrong, like you see him again when they start going into the factory, and then later on you find out he's actually just been, this whole thing has just been kind of a ruse, being set up by Willy Wonka, and he actually works for him. So there's that. But in regards to us having like a potential villain in this, I just think that he was there and then he was gone.
I guess that's and the whole Slugworth being the villain thing, that's never in the book whatsoever, like not even close.
Mm. And by the way, we are not counting in regards to like Slugworth's backstory or anything like that. We are not paying any attention to that Tom and Jerry cartoon. I'm really sorry.
Oh God, no, no.
Exactly. So we're only factoring in what's actually in the original 1971 film. We're not paying any attention to any additional stuff or anything like that. We're not even going to go there. So.
Oh, but don't worry. We'll talk about that piece of crap movie later, but not now.
Really?
Yeah. Yes, we have to. It is a Willy Wonka. I mean, it is a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory adaptation. We have to do it. We have no other choice.
Great.
Yeah, I know, but don't worry, we still have a long ways to go before we get to that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's continue. So finally, we have Willy Wonka stepping out of the chocolate factory, and if you actually read through interviews, Gene Wilder said that he intentionally wanted to start off by walking in a limp to kind of, confuse the audience and kind of like draw them into confusion. So every time that you see like a confused or concerned face from the crowd, that's actually real. Like they had no idea that Gene Wilder was going to walk out with a limp. And then finally, when the cane gets stuck into the sidewalk and then he falls over, then he tumbles up and then their applause just comes on by, that is like legitimately happening. And he even said that if they did not let him limp throughout that part of the scene, he would have left the project altogether.
Mm-hmm. So it's like it was here's the thing with Gene Wilder, like there's the type of actor who knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what the character is. He knows how he wants it to go forward. And I just say if you have that type of actor, just let him go for it, and then you can tell him with takes whether it's actually going to work or not. So I mean, I'm glad the director in this case to put some faith in Gene Wilder's performance and said, oh hey, we're going to just let him go with it, and we're just going to work around him and to massive avail, and to massive benefit, because he definitely pulls out. He gets to the point where it's kind of like you see this kind of mysteriousness in this kind of this seriousness in the character to start with, and then all of a sudden you find that he's actually this kind of whimsical and like this really fun, but then also kind of like creepy and kind of scary kind of guy as well, and you're just engulfed in his performance, and like for the whole entire movie, for that, and so like great entrance, great exit too. So
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And I think that for the most part, it plays off very similar in the book. So it starts off with, Willy Wonka letting everybody into the factory, introducing, himself to the winners and the parents. And so they go inside the chocolate factory, and it starts off like this really constrained hallway. And then when it opens up to the actual chocolate room, all that stuff that you see in there is mostly real. Like you have the giant gummy bear that Violet eats from. Only the ear you can eat from that actually happened. There was jam inside of the jawbreaker that they could eat from. That was whipped cream, all that stuff that people were eating from. It was like legitimately real. And from what I understand in interviews, when they went inside to the chocolate room for the first time, that was literally the very first time they went inside the chocolate room, and the reactions to the people were genuine because they wanted to capture it. So, and then I think that you have the Pure Imagination song, which is probably the most famous song out of the entire lineup of music. That and the Oompa Loompa song, but we'll get to that later. And we even have this one scene in which when Gene Wilder is drinking from the cup and he eats it, and that cup is wax, by the way. So, he is putting his all into this performance where he's like being incredibly inviting and singing about pure imagination for everybody who's enjoying what's going on. And I think that it's really magical. And I think that's the one scene that people still remember, because it's like, wouldn't you like to go inside a room that is filled with candy and chocolate? I mean, as a kid, of course. As an adult, I mean, I'm sure they'll be like, oh, that's like high sugar, and you can get diabetes and stuff like that. But no, but for a kid, that is like the most magical thing you could ever see. So let's talk about the Chocolate River. Now, Gene Siskel was mentioning about how the Chocolate River looked incredibly fake, that it looked like the Chicago River, which at the time was polluted. And yeah, there's like a bunch of conflicting discussions about the river itself, whether it was made of chocolate or not. Some sources say that it was made out of, cocoa powder, sugar, and cream. Other sources say that it was water that had food coloring in it, but then they added cocoa powder to give it the more chocolate feel. But all the sources that I have read said that it stunk up the place, and as soon as they poured in the stuff that they added in to make the chocolate river look more like chocolate, it was like incredibly overwhelming. Like the place had stunk up for hours, and sometimes they couldn't even handle shooting scenes there because it stunk so bad.
yeah, but imagine being the imagine being the whole child actor who had to like kind of like swim in this stuff.
Oh geez, yeah, the kid, the kid who played Augustus Gloop. Oh my God, like imagine having to swim through that thing. That must have been awful.
How much am I getting paid again?
They're child labor laws, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like and I mean, obviously, I mean, yeah, you have to, if you're a new actor and you have to, obviously, you have to pay your dues in some cases. And oh boy, in one scene, did they have to pay their dues in that one? Like, because you remember the car scene when, obviously, this is a lot later in the movie, but they had the whole, had all this like whipped cream currently coming out. And by the way, it wasn't whipped cream that they were being sprayed with. It was actually the same type of foam that you get in fire extinguishers. So basically, they loaded up this car with like loads of like this stuff, and like why you couldn't just use real cream or like use some kind of foam or whatever, or even use bubbles. Even bubbles would have been more fun.
Oh yeah, because it was supposed to be made out of cola. So I guess maybe they thought that the bubbles were used in the fizzy lifting drink. So I guess they didn't want to be repetitive. I have no idea.
No, they weren't using it. I mean, the fizzy lifting drinks kind of look like water. So as far as I'm aware, they didn't actually look like, anything in particular. But I mean, as far as I'm aware, like, there was nothing in that like, that looks, same as the car. But the fact that they used that foam was really negligent because, and also, I mean, this stuff hit Gene Wilder in the face as well, if you recall. So I mean, after they were done shooting that scene, it started to cause massive skin irritation, and they had to receive medical treatment for it.
Oh, geez, yeah.
I'm really surprised they didn't have many questions for it. I'm really surprised they agreed to it. So, like, hey, it was. I think a lot of people were pretty glad that this production was over. I think after it was done, I think again the fact how bad it smelled, how irritant it was, and all the stuff they basically had to go through in order to basically shoot the scenes.
Yes, yes. And so yeah, after Augustus Gloop is shot out of the tunnel to go over to the fudge room, so now we get the infamous. Well, we go over to the Oompa Loompas. That's when we first get introduced to them, and they are singing the Oompa Loompa song, and they sing this multiple times. They use the same tune as they sing about every single children who is caught doing a naughty thing, and so. You have this backstory about the Oompa Loompas saying that they came from Loompa Land and how they were treated horribly, they were abused, and they were eaten by these creatures called pernicious knits, which I recently read through Charlie and the Glass Elevator, and that whole thing about the pernicious knits is like a huge plot hole because in the book they're aliens from outer space.
Mm-hmm.
That's weird.
Yeah, so basically, apparently there has been alien life. So I mean, what did these Oompa Loompas come from Area 51 or something? And like,
it didn't say anything about the Oompa Loompas coming from space, just the pernicious knits.
No, I mean like so basically, if we're talking about extraterrestrial life coming down, like the Knits probably would have ended up in like Area 51, and that's where the Oompa Loompas probably might have been. I don't know. But you just happen to have been there after they were attacked by the Knids. I'm not too sure. But yeah, that was a massive plot hole in that regard. But I think obviously there was quite a few references to other Roald Dahl works in this as well. So like he has gone to Billy Hunches from obviously the BFG, and so like.
Well, I mean, remember the BFG came out in 1982, the book, and this book was written in 1964. So this book came out first, and I guess the BFG copied off of that. Not only the Scrumdiddlyumptious, but also the fizzy lifting drinks as well. Except that the fizzy lifting drinks in that one is completely different. You see, when Charlie and Grandpa Joe drank from it, all they needed to do was burp out so they can be able to land back in. While the BFG, he farted so he can be able to lift himself up.
Oh, where's Papa?
Yes.
But so I mean, obviously, I mean with the Roald Dahl references, I mean obviously they threw him into this movie, and I mean it'd be interesting to see if we actually maybe in the later movie maybe the Knids probably weren't aliens, maybe they actually were like maybe they were, instead of like going around space in the elevators, maybe they went around the world. I'm not too sure. But,
yeah, I mean, I from what I remember, it was they went up to space, then they went up to meet the President of the United States, then they went over to this land so that they can be able to change Charlie's grandparents out of babies into their regular old selves. It's a weird book.
Yeah, basically, it's like, guys, you have fun with your YouTube poops. We had fun with our Roald Dahl books. That's basically
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So now we need to talk about the infamous boat scene. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess this is where they tried to kind of capture Roald Dahl's kind of twistedness in a way, but it does feel a bit out of place of like why he would basically kind of take them on this crazy boat trip. But yeah, because like apparently like it's a boat that induces all their fears. So like you see all this kind of like all this like awful imagery of like chickens' heads being cut off and centipedes going around people's faces, and Slugworth is probably obviously one there as well, and all this awful stuff that would kind of scare you was like obviously as a kid or as an adult, and then all of a sudden he just starts randomly singing. And then he just starts getting more maniacal and more crazy as he starts to go along, and then just starts to scream. Like, it's kind of like you are in this kind of like, this, what the fuck moment. I think it's probably the only best way to describe it. I think you always say. And then all of a sudden he just kind of stops, and then he just, they're there at the secret place. And I don't know if that's because, it's a way to kind of like keep Slugworth and maybe keep other people away from his like secret laboratory or something like that. I don't know. But maybe that's just one way of as to how he basically keeps his secret by obviously keep taking them down the tunnel, which invokes their fears. I'm not too sure, but it does leave me intrigued about how this how big and how wide, or how what basically how this crazy factory works.
Yeah, and I think that the poem that Willy Wonka says while they're traveling through the river, it is from the book, but it's told nowhere near as demented. There's no crazy scenes with things in the background, like the chicken getting his head cut off, or the woman who's getting bugs crawled all over her, or the eye, or anything like that.
Like, yeah, that was never going to appear in the book.
That
Like
was
that.
never in the book. The only thing that was in the book was just that it was really, really dark. Nobody could see. Willy Wonka saying this weird poem, and then they just travel through the factory, and that's pretty much it. But no, it's like, hey, we're the 70s. We're going to make things creepy and trippy and psychedelic. Anyway, so then finally, very similar to the book, they go over to the place where they make all the cream, the whipped cream, the coffee cream, the hair cream. In the book, it was described about how there's this toffee that you can be able to grow goatees and a beard, but that would not be in the Willy Wonka version. It would be in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory version, the one with Johnny Depp.
Yeah, and if you remember, there was also the one scene where Mike Teevee actually ate one of the exploding candies, which actually didn't actually happen in the book.
No, it did not. It did not happen. There was no exploding candies anywhere in the book. They're just describing about like the different creams, but the gum that that Violet Beaureguarde chews on, the one that has the 3-course meal, that is in the book. And it definitely, for some reason, kind of reminds me of those weird food pills that the 70s used to be obsessed over. Like, take this one pill a day and you could be able to eat like a whole 3-course meal without needing to eat like real food. So the whole scene where Violet Beauregarde tastes like tomato soup, and as the appetizer, the roast beef with the baked potato as the dinner course, and then finally the blueberry pie as the dessert, and then finally her face turns blue and then she blows up into this gigantic blueberry. That does happen in the book and in the movie as well. And so the Oompa Loompas, they push her in to this room so that she could be able to be squeezed out. And so, yeah, that does happen. And then throughout the course of the movie, they're like taken over to these various places. You have the wallpaper, the licking wallpaper is another one. And then you have the fizzy lifting drinks. The wallpaper, by the way, is like glanced over in the book. They don't go to it. Willy Wonka just shows it. But in the movie, it takes like a few minutes just to dedicate to this. And we even discussed about this, that this could have been cut off and nothing would have happened. And then finally we go over to the fizzy lifting room. And this is the scene in which when Charlie and Grandpa Joe, they drink the fizzy lifting drinks and they float up into the air. And then they find out that the way that they can be able to go down is by burping.
Yeah, like, it's, you thought last, this actually was a pretty intimidating scene when you really think about it, because you would have thought, like, oh, hey, like, you've seen all these kids get their comeuppances, and now all of a sudden here you're going to see Charlie also get his as well. And then, thankfully, it's the quick thinking of a wise old Grandpa Joe to obviously get, save Charlie from being cut up into small pieces. So
yeah, for sure. But then we go over to the next scene in which when Charlie takes him to the next room where the goose are laying the golden chocolate eggs. In the book, it's actually there are a bunch of squirrels in the room and they're testing out nuts. So there's a nut room that they go to next. And Veruca Salt is complaining to her father that she wants the golden goose. And then she has the I Want It Now song. And then for some reason, she climbs up on the scale so she can be able to grab the goose to have it for herself. But the scale moves over to the scale dubs her as a bad egg, and she falls all the way down. And that's when Veruca's father chases after her, and he's also a bad egg as well. In the book, it's described that Veruca's head was hollow and empty. So when the squirrels were banging her head to see if she had any nuts in there, like as in like if there was anything in her mind, it was completely empty, and so they decided to throw her into the garbage chute. So
well, you can say she was a bad nut, but you can't say she wasn't nuts.
Right, exactly. So I guess maybe the reason why they decided to change it was because having a whole bunch of squirrels would have been very difficult to have, especially with a movie as small a budget as this.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we get over to that scene where they, ride on that, cola mobile, and then all of the foam starts popping out. We already discussed about that. Then we have the TV room. Well, in the book, they actually go inside the glass elevator, and Mike Teevee is saying like, "Is there a TV room?" And Wonka's like, "Yeah, we have the Wonka television studio." And so then Mike pushes it, and then they see very similar to the book in which like, you take a chocolate bar, you transmit it into a bunch of tiny little pieces while it floats up onto the air, and then it lands on your TV, and you can be able to grab it whenever that you're tuning into a channel. So that does happen, and we do have the scene in which when Mike is asking about like, can people go in there, and Wonka's like, sure they could, but I wouldn't recommend it, and he goes in anyway, and then he turns into like this little tiny creature, and
It's almost
then
like
he
there's a theme to this movie, like, kids obviously making these really dumb decisions and then all of them getting comeuppances.
yeah, that's going to be a thing we're going to be seeing a lot in these Roald Dahl books and adaptations. It's like, kids who are bad and, are the ones who get punished, and kids who are good are the ones who get rewarded. And you even and that the whole message of Mike Teevee with, television is bad and reading is good is definitely something that you're going to see a lot in these Roald Dahl adaptations, especially when we get to Matilda.
Hmm. And also, what makes this one different is that they kind of do more a kind of a remix of the Oompa Loompa song in
Yeah,
this one.
yeah, exactly. In the book, they were like specific songs that the Oompa Loompas would sing. They would sing like Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, the great big silly nincompoop, would go up into the tunnel, and then there would be like for Violet, it would be like chewing, Violet Beaureguarde would be chewing all day long, and then there would be like for Mike Teevee, is like, his head is as soft as cheese. Constantly watching TV all day is bad for you and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the Oompa Loompas had exclusive songs for each character, and they would be sung that way. As for the movie, it was the Oompa Loompa song sung over and over again with completely different lyrics. They wouldn't use the lyrics of the Oompa Loompas in this until when Charlie and the Chocolate Factory would come out, and then they would actually use the lyrics from the book.
Mm-hmm. So I think in regards to like the Oompa Loompa songs themselves, it's like it always has the same theme. Obviously, it's the same. It's obviously the reoccurring music that currently goes through. It's the one thing that they constantly sing, which is a bit. I mean, obviously, it doesn't get repetitive. I guess you could say. I mean, obviously, it'll get repetitive if you like watch this movie more than once. But if you look at say for example, the one thing I will give credit to the 2005 version of the movie is that they did like several variations of songs in
Yeah, they did.
60s all the way up to like the modern age, and getting all the way up to like when you finally get to Mike Teevee and his comeuppances, and obviously they do a more modern version of that. But in regards to the 1971 version, which we're talking about now, like it sticks to a theme, and it picks a theme and sticks with it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So, and the good thing is that the Oompa Loompa song is actually very catchy and memorable. If it was like horrible and repetitive and ear grating, then yeah, we'd be complaining about it because they sing this song a total of 4 or 5 times. But no, the song is that good that we don't mind listening to it every once in a while.
Yeah, mind you, it's like it's yeah. Well, I think one thing I always I always thought about the Oompa Loompas is that obviously you can tell how noticeable they are and how colorful they are, and how adaptable they are as well. Because they they're not just stuck in one costume. They'll change appearances as well, throughout whatever they're doing. So obviously you can see in in the whole Mike Teevee thing that it's all white and they're he's wearing safety gear and stuff like that. So it's just kind of which is a nice change. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can tell at least forgive all the craziness and all the wackiness that happens in this factory. At least something seems to be taking serious safety securely around there. I guess.
Yeah. So then we go over to the last scene. In the book, Charlie is the last one. Willy Wonka congratulates him. And so then they go up into the glass elevator, and Charlie is told by Willy Wonka that not only does he get the lifetime supply of chocolate, but he gets to own the factory. And then it would continue off later in Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, in which they pick up, Grandpa George, Grandpa Georgina, Grandpa Josephine. They lift him out of the bed, and then they go into space.
Yeah.
Yes, but in the movie, so because Charlie drank from the fizzy lifting drinks, Willy Wonka told him that he doesn't get anything, and he tells him to go away. Which this scene where Gene Wilder is like yelling, and he goes incredibly angry towards Charlie. Peter Ostrum did not have a clue that this is what he was going to be reacting to. So when you see his shocked face, he is legitimately shocked. He had no idea that Gene Wilder was going to be acting this way, especially since from what I've heard in interviews from Peter, he said that he was like a second parent to him. He was so nice to him. He loved everybody in the cast, and he was so gentle and kind. So I'm sure that this might have been a huge shock for him to seeing him going incredibly angry towards him. It's like he didn't know what to think of it. And so yeah, it's a really nice performance. And once again, kudos to Gene Wilder for not, telling Peter Ostrum about what he was going to do, because that reaction is amazing. And so then we have Charlie dropping off the everlasting gobstopper, even though he could have had the opportunity to give it to Slugworth, even though he's, because he promised him, that he was going to give him $10,000 and, good food and a good home for his family for years to come. But no, he was being honest. And so he decides to drop off the gobstopper over at his desks and walks away. And then Willy Wonka smiles at him saying, "Congratulations, Charlie, you won." And then we have Mr. Wilkinson, who pretended to be Slugworth so that he can be able to test all the children out, and Charlie was the good boy who got everything in the end. And so that's when the movie ends with them going inside the glass elevator for the first time, and then it lifts up and we get to see all of Belgium, because that's where the movie was filmed at.
Yeah, and some parts were actually filmed in Munich as well, from what I understand.
Yeah, there are some parts of Munich, which actually Hollywood was not very happy that they chose to film in Munich or in Belgium, because they said that, they were doing this because of, you're doing this because you're cheating off of your budget, where you could have easily filmed it at Hollywood. But the reason why was because they wanted to get the authenticity of making it feel like, it could take place anywhere. They wanted to give it a timeless feeling, as opposed to like being on a set and, having to work with much more of a limitation. So, very
surprise. A lot, they did things that would make the film timeless, and they actually made the film timeless. So
I know, right? What a shock.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's pretty much the end of the movie. And I have to say that looking back on it again, I haven't seen this movie since I was a kid. I've heard mixed reactions from people over the years saying that it's either a timeless classic or a movie that's good in some places, but is incredibly dated by today's standards. And then there are the people who actually like the 2005 Charlie and the Chocolate Factory version. So looking back on it,
the 2005 version, I think still has a lot of pluses to it. I think the only thing that I think that kind of overshadows it, I think, is that when Johnny Depp denied it was actually a portrayal of Michael Jackson. I think that's the one thing that you can easily say, well, how can you say that this is not Michael Jackson when there's so many red flags that say that this is a portrayal of Michael Jackson? But but in regards to this version of the film, it still airs on television today. It's such a classic, and it's probably up there with Wizard of Oz. It's probably up there with some of the classical films that we all with Mary Poppins and things like that. Some of the great films of that age in the 20th century. But so I mean, in regards to we'll still be this was a classical gem in the VHS. Collection, and it definitely will be in the Blu-ray and definitely in the DVD collection, and definitely also be online wherever it is. Is it on Netflix, or is it?
No, not anymore. But it will be on Netflix soon, because, as mentioned before, they are doing that contract deal of Netflix doing brand new animated adaptations based off of Roald Dahl's books. So we will be getting a new version of Willy Wonka and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We'll finally get Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. We'll get Henry Sugar. We'll get the Twits. The Marvelous Misadventures of George and all that stuff. So yeah, we'll be getting a lot more animated adaptations, but I haven't heard anything since last year. I don't know if the project was dropped, but I think that you can still find it on like streaming sites or on YouTube for a few dollars. So
if you actually, I will tell you right now, if you want to watch Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory like me and Patricia have done, you can actually get it right now on YouTube, and you can get it on Google Play. So
yeah, you can, for sure. And it's a shame that Roald Dahl hated this version, because even though that it did take a lot of creative liberties by removing some things from the book or adding some things that weren't in the book, like the music and some of the scenes and all that kind of stuff. And I understand that he hated Gene Wilder because, he thought of him as too presumptuous, and he wanted, Spike Mulligan to be Willy Wonka. I get that, but I just wish he wasn't so uptight with his adaptations, because this is still a phenomenal film. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend that you check it out. Yes, there are some things about it that are pretty dated, like, the way that the chocolate room was being built and all that stuff. So that's fine. I mean, it is the 70s, so, and they did have a low budget of $3 million, so they couldn't, like, glamorize it to, I'm sure that they wanted to, but it's still amazing and it's still a classic, so I do recommend it. As for if it's the best Roald Dahl movie adaptation, that's hard to say because most of them are pretty good. And we'll be discussing more about that much later on. So, in the meanwhile, we're going to be getting stuck into TV movies for the next 2 months because we have to wait another 18 years for our next adaptation. Tune in next time as we're going to be talking about Danny, the Champion of the World.
Thanks, Patricia, for having me on the show.
Thank you for being here. And until then, we'll catch you later. So, bye bye.
Bye bye.